There is a whole generation of 20-something-year-olds, and I'll even extend it into their 30s, that really are dedicated to making the world a better place. And they're not doing it necessarily for money. They're doing it out of love of science, love of, clean water or fresh air. And so there are quite a few very smart young people working on these issues, and they seem highly motivated. And because of the way communication works, they can intersect each other a lot quicker than in the past.
What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. This podcast is sponsored by Berman Falk Hospitality Group, a design-driven furniture manufacturer who specializes in custom case goods and seating for hotel guest rooms.
Today's guest is an entrepreneur, television host, speaker, author, world explorer, and Emmy Award winner. He's hosted a variety of nature-oriented programs, including Exploration with Richard Wiese and the BBC series Hell on Earth. Over his career, his work has earned 14 daytime Emmy nominations with 2 wins. Throughout his wildlife adventures, he strives to connect people through discoveries in nature and scientific exploration. He's also the host and executive producer of Born to Explore and president of the Explorers Club based in New York City. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Richard Wiese. Welcome, Richard.
Well, thank you, Dan. That was a very generous introduction there. I always feel I'm better on paper than through introductions, but you've done a great job.
Well, I can tell everyone that you're actually better in person. And what's really interesting is I get so many of these pitches for people to come on the podcast, and I take very few of them. And I almost hit the floor when I got one from the PR company at the Explorers Club saying, "Would you like to talk to Richard Wiese? Because you and I are dad friend, like we're friends, and our kids are the same age. And I remember taking them to the baseball diamond and making them run around the bases and shagging fly balls. And so I know you, and this is so exciting. And I'm just happy to have you on."
You're almost, I can't say you're walking distance because there's a very steep hill by that very name between your house and my house. But yes, we know each other. The wives know each other. The kids know each other.
Oh yeah, they're in a book club together, aren't they?
I'd be surprised if they read many books there.
Oh yeah, they just talk about how incredible we are as their husbands.
Anyhow, yes, I'm happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. And the other thing is, before knowing you, many years when I lived in New York City, I'd been invited to the Explorers Club by a friend of mine who is a member of the Explorers Club. And I was just blown away by this. There's so many private clubs around the world, but to see one that's purpose-built for people that had been to all ends of the earth and even outer space. And that flag you have behind your left shoulder, I think members of the club bring those all over the world and to outer space. I don't know if there's one of those on the moon.
There is. So, it's so funny. In my desk drawer by me, and maybe I don't have it. I thought I had a flag sitting here, but the Explorers Club's been around since 1904, and its members are the first to the North Pole, first to the South, first on the moon, first on Everest, first to the bottom of the Marianas Trench. Even my own father was the first person to solo the Pacific Ocean in an airplane. And you mentioned there are flags at the Explorers Club, and so they're all numbered, and every one of the Apollo missions to the moon carry the Explorers Club flag. And it's funny, the Apollo 13 flag actually came from a note from James Lovell, the commander of that. And he said, "Sorry, I couldn't complete the mission. Here's the flag."
Oh, you gave it back?
Yeah. And, a few years ago, I happened to have Mark Armstrong, Neil Armstrong's son, happened to have the flag at his house, brought it back to the club to donate it. And one of the things I love best about the Explorers Club is you get to hear some great behind the scenes stories. And I said to him, "Mark, when your dad came back from the moon and he's in that quarantine trailer that they had for the Apollo astronauts, what's the first thing he said to you?" And he said, "You boys been mowing the lawn?" And it's such a dad thing to say, right? you see your kid and it's not about the moon. It's, you've been doing your chores. So yeah, for me, it's been great. Um, it's like Harry Potter's Hogwarts for adults.
Oh, I definitely got that feeling. And we'll talk about that in a second because I recently had an experience being there where you introduced this incredible world changing couple, the Jouberts, I believe they were, but
Yeah, Beverly and Derek Joubert.
they're incredible. But also you got to welcome me into that Hogwarts. So you welcomed me into your home before, but also to be able to see that at this storied place on the upper or Midtown East,
Upper East Side.
Upper East Side. Um, I just felt so at home in such a group of incredible people from all over the world that are just very intrigued by what the Explorers Club brings. But before we get into all of that, um, you've traveled all over the world. You've experienced so many different cultures and people from the time you were a kid. I remember the story you told me of your dad dragging you up Mount Kilimanjaro when you were a kid. But what does hospitality mean to you? How do you define it? And then we can kind of pull on that thread from there.
Well, it's funny you mentioned thread, because to me, hospitality isn't about thread count. It's really about heart. And it really transcends wealth or design. It's really how people treat one another. And, there are 5,000 languages spoken on Earth, yet there are universal languages of food, music, art, dance, nature. And when you sit there and you break bread with somebody over a meal, and it could be in Morocco, it could be sitting on the floor. It's, as I said, it's less about that thread count and really what, is coming from their soul. And, it's makes somebody feel that they're being heard or comfortable. And there's something very wonderful about it.
So I want to go back to being up at the Explorers Club recently, because I also find that in all of my travels, especially whenever I've been on safari in Africa in particular, and then met a bunch of the expats who moved to Kenya or grew up in Kenya, they have these most incredible stories of just the time that they contracted malaria while logging up in Uganda or whatever. But the Jouberts, who are their life mission is really conservation, and they were run out of Botswana at one point and recently went back, and that was incredible to hear. But the millions of acres that they've put into conservation, and also the people that they bring into these areas that they've conserved, and just to impact them and create this I got the feeling just from their stories, their filmmaking, their trials and tribulations, they're like a lightning rod for awareness in conservation.
Definitely.
And bringing people into that fold and really changing the world. And I was just totally blown away. And I would think that sitting in the seat that you sit at the Explorers Club, you're around. That was just one couple that I met, but you must see so many of these people that are trying to change the world and make the world and outer space a smaller place.
Well, they happen to be an extraordinary couple, even by Explorers Club standards. They are truly world class. A lot of people might not recognize the name, but know their National Geographic films that they do on Africa. But that very lectern that you saw me stand at and them stand at, it's one of my favorite places at the Explorers Club, because I've seen Jane Goodall's hands on there. I've seen Neil Armstrong's hands on there. I've seen Sir Edmund Hillary. I've seen one great person after another. And I guess one of the great traditions of exploration is storytelling. And it really goes way before the Explorers Club, when people first came out of caves or out of trees, my relatives more recently than others. But they, someone would always stand there and say, "You'll never guess what happened to me. You'll never guess what I saw." And that's a tradition that follows. Um, a couple stories come to mind. Uh, I was We had an event where we had 9 Apollo astronauts, and I was driving with one of them back to his hotel in a taxi. And I was saying, when I was a kid, one of my favorite memories of my father was standing under the stars. And, he knew celestial navigation when he started in the airlines. And so Al Warden said, when I was coming back from the moon, which is always a great way to start a story, he said, I was afraid that we would have the same issues that Apollo 13 had of losing coordinates and then really not being able to get home. So he said, without telling NASA, he goes, I have an 8-inch window on my Apollo spacecraft. And he said, I decided that I'd use celestial navigation to find my way back to Earth. Think about this. To do it just on Earth itself is hard, but now the moon is moving, Earth is moving, and you're in a spacecraft, but yet you had the competency to be able to do this, just on your own. I got goosebumps.
So wait, just so I'm hearing this right, because I remember in Apollo 13, the movie, when the computers went down, if something was wrong, they were using stars and line of sight, dead reckoning almost with a burn. You could override the computers to figure out your way home?
I mean, the computers were not very sophisticated at that point. Other stories of Buzz Aldrin telling landing on the moon, or even remember I was on an expedition with Prince Albert, to drop a name, and he was giving me a ride on his jet back to Montreal so I could get back to New York. And there was a astronaut, Chris Hadfield, on there, and we were just all talking about seeing aurora borealis, and he chimed in. He goes, "Well, I happened to do a spacewalk over my country during an aurora borealis, and it was also the country's first spacewalk. So not only is it seeing the northern lights, but it's actually walking in space over the northern lights." Or I mean, it's just story after story like that, and it sounds like people are either name dropping or being pompous. But when you start a conversation with somebody who whether they've dove on the Titanic or been up Kilimanjaro, Everest, the conversation just jumps in at a much higher level or placement, because you just assume the person knows where it is and it's been there and it's eaten there and it's been under the stars. So yeah, it's fun. I really enjoy the community.
Okay, so how does someone become a member of the Explorers Club, number one? And when did you become president? And what's been I guess, your driving force as far as being president? How do you want to shape the future, or on your tenure as president of the Explorer Club? What's your top 1 or 2 goals as the Explorers Club president?
So for me, how most people become, this is not, a travelers club. In order to be a member, you have to have contributed to science in some sort of manner. So while climbing Everest might be a great feat, it wouldn't necessarily qualify you as a member. But maybe you study butterflies in Central Park, and that might be a way. I've been involved with science since I was a boy. You mentioned that my father took me to climb Mount Kilimanjaro when I was 11. When I was in high school, I helped the local conservation officer build the first artificial reef in the Long Island Sound. And then when I went to Brown, my major was in the sciences. So I had a science background. I have a favorite uncle at MIT who's the head of their nuclear engineering department. His daughter works on the Mars rover. So, I've had that. I was lucky to have great mentors in my life. But I can tell you, when I first joined the Explorers Club, there's just no way, if you said you'd ever be the president of this organization, I would have thought, yeah, right. I mean, I was just honored to be a member. And lo and behold, in 2002, I was elected to be president. And, it's pretty awesome, because everything from heads of state to famous history-making people come through those doors, and you're part of that history. But, you said, what is the driving mechanism? I think anybody who works for a non-for-profit ultimately wants to make the world a better place. But I also feel that unrealized potential of explorers and scientists around the world is something that I want to overcome. And so during COVID, I started this honor program called the Explorers Club 50. 50 people who are changing the world that the world needs to know about. And it was built on the premise that all of us, Dan, including you, when you travel someplace, you meet somebody extraordinary. It could be in Mexico, Nepal, and you go, my God, this person's extraordinary. And that's usually where the conversation ends. And so what I asked explorers to do is break the mirror of self-reflection and say, instead of look at me, look who I found. And the program is now in its 6th year. That's 300 people. It's like 50-50 male, female, 50% international. There's people from Nepal. There's people from South America. It's an extraordinary program. It's organically derived, and each class is more amazing than the next. It goes from relatively young to, I found a woman named Susan Bauer on Cape Cod who has an organization, she's 85, called Old Ladies Against Underwater Garbage. And she goes in these ponds and they clean out, trash from these ponds. And she is like one of the most inspiring women or persons I've ever met. I mean, just an extraordinary person.
Okay, so Susan Bauer or even yourself, myself, and anyone listening to this, we have a lot of architects, designers, and other people who are building hotels, restaurants, bars, resorts around the world, and other entrepreneurs. But one of the things that I am a champion of, whether it's in my entrepreneurs organization or within my industry, there's so many paths of leadership that can help promote scholarship, whether you're at a committee level, a president, a membership chair. There's so many nonprofits that we can all get involved in that I think sometimes people feel intimidated to do, but it's a good way to pierce through, in my experience. It's a good way for me to pierce through what I do, who I'm always talking to, and also just kind of change my perspective and see how other leaders lead. Do you have any experience share or opinion on people who are listening that if there is an industry organization that they've been debating whether or not to take that leap and to like dedicate some time to, do you have any words of encouragement to take that step for them?
So there's a famous oceanographer named Sylvia Earle. They call her deepness because she has some incredible oceanography records. But she always has young people coming and say, "Oh, Dr. Earle, I'd love to do exactly what you're doing." And she said to them, if you hang around the action long enough, you become part of the action. Meaning if, say, you're a high school kid and you're interested in oceanography, go down there, be the person who cleans the boat or does the job that no one else wants to do. And suddenly you become part of the gang. And I think that my wife, Nikki, has a saying, doing well by doing good. There are many benefits to volunteerism. And one is that you meet incredible people in maybe in a non-work environment, and you get to know them. So your network of people you meet, becomes incredible. And I think, as you mentioned, you get to see how other people kind of do things.
I'd also love to give a shout out, and thank you for mentioning Nikki again. By the way, Nikki, if you're listening, when you're listening, that's the second time we've talked about you here. So Alexa, I'll give you a shout out too. But Nikki took it upon herself just in our town in Connecticut to collect food scraps from people's table, all the waste. And I don't know what the number is at right now, but it must be over 10 or 20 tons of food waste that then gets turned into compost now. But my point of sharing that story is, for all the listeners, there's so many opportunities to become a part of the gang, like Richard said, or Sylvia Earle said, and he quoted, where we can lift where we stand and make an impact. And I think that's what I was also most impressed by when I experienced you at the Explorers Club and having the Jouberts there and telling their story and how their impact. And it doesn't have to be like the most incredible impact. Every little step, every drop of water can turn into a waterfall, which is what I say that all the time.
A ripple. So, Dan, I'm curious. You saw me standing at that lectern that I described, speaking to an audience. Was it any different than when you normally see me? Obviously, different circumstances.
No, the only thing is that you just didn't make eye contact with me because you had these bright lights shining in your face. Normally, I felt like you were talking to me, even though there were really bright lights in that old storied room.
Yeah, they were, because they were doing that they stream these things, and that night I remember they had just like boosh lights in your face. I have to tell you a funny story regarding that. So in 2004, I was president of the Explorers Club, and it was our centennial, and we have Sir Edmund Hillary there, and I was introducing Buzz Aldrin. And so you have those bright lights, and it's like in the movie bodyguard, you see one face that doesn't look the same or smiling approaching you. And this guy was sort of coming towards the stage, and I was above the stage because it was at the Waldorf, and there's I guess about 3.5, 4 foot riser. And this guy, and I thought, my God, he's going to try to shoot Buzz Aldrin. So I took my napkin, dinner napkin, and I put it in front of his face because I thought, all right, let me cut his line of sight off. And he grabbed my hand and he bit me. And so I've put it together like the Zapruder tapes, why he was so agitated. And so he was like, how can you be spending all this money on, going to the moon when blah, 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 blah. And it's interesting to that extent too, more than ever lately, I've been meeting more and more moon deniers that we actually landed on the moon.
That is just unbelievable to me. That people don't. It's almost like my thinking is, and this could be a whole other tangent, which we might not need to go down. But when I was a kid, and even into my early 20s, I always thought that 3 or 4% of the world thought that Elvis was still alive. Now, Elvis obviously is dead now because so much time has gone by, but it was like that. And maybe in that 3 to 4 or 5% buck.
But it almost seemed funny, right? It was not like it was serious that you don't believe that the earth is round or something like that.
Oh, so you throw in the flat earthers, the conspiracies, the science deny, all these things that are happening. I just feel like that 3 to 5% number of people who were just kind of kooky, I think it's like 15 or 20% now. And it doesn't have to be Elvis. You name it. And it's a very unusual time. And I think it's all the more reason why I think science and the Explorers Club and your role there and getting that word out and impacting people, I think it's just all the more important now more than ever.
Yeah, no, I mean, not just that, but I also think that volunteerism brings out the best in people, civics. And I think that, the world is an angry place right now. I mean, part of that is by design that, let's face it, if you're China or Russia, just so discontent in America, you don't have to aim missiles at us. All you have to do is, talk smack about whatever their ideology is. And, people seem to get angry. But that's the beautiful thing about design and hospitality, because you're trying to go completely the opposite of that.
Hey, everybody. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. And one of the themes that consistently comes up is sustainability. And I'm just really proud to announce that our sponsor, Berman Falk Hospitality Group, is the first within our hospitality industry to switch to sustainable and recyclable packaging, eliminating the use of styrofoam. Please check out their impact page in the show notes for more info.
I want to go back, like using Nikki and yourself and your missions of volunteerism and lifting where you stand, if you will. You're busy, you're a dad, you're a husband, you're producing shows, you're winning Emmys, you're getting nominated for Emmys, just like everyone else. We're all busy doing our day-to-day. But I always say that all of us have 5% of our time that we can dedicate to other things. How do you balance all of the things that you're doing, but also manage to tell the stories that you tell and stand at the helm of the Explorers Club?
Things are much easier and they don't seem like work when you love what you're doing, right? When you really love, like, I love filming internationally, in the desert, whatever it is, that I find fun. The business aspect of any industry is usually less fun, accounting and, personality conflicts and all that other stuff. I personally feel very enthusiastic about life and optimistic to some degree. And, part of that too, I think there's a larger holistic equation of even good health that makes you more vibrant. If you're always hungover or you're not sleeping enough, everything becomes, or if you're in a bad relationship, everything becomes hard and harder on you. And so I think, the big buzzword these days, especially for guys our age and older, is longevity. How do you live long, being vibrant and enjoying what you do? Because I do think that in all industries, that your ability to sort of solve problems or design something or create gets better with time. The only intersection, sort of like a good quarterback, gets smarter, but sometimes their body starts failing and they can't use those smarts. So I think that, one of the goals of being successful is being vibrant past your 20s and 30s or even 40s, that you're still vibrant in your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s.
And part of that, I would think, well, I'm going to go out on a limb here for you, and doing all the things that you do. And you've said these words a few times in speaking and leading up to this, but this idea of storytelling. And so many of the listeners that are listening here are designers, architects, engineers. Well, maybe not the engineers as much, but who knows? But through any kind of narrative where they are really trying to tell a story of, where is this place that we're building? How do we do as much research as we can and tell the story about it, so that we're at whatever this built environment is, it connects with the place that we are at. I've also felt that this idea of storytelling has become like an overused couple of words there. What are your feelings on the idea of storytelling as a storyteller? And now it seems to be like the buzzword of the decade.
Yeah, I mean, I hate when certain terms get overused because then you're like, blah, right? I think that storytelling isn't just about travel. For example, I'm holding a glass out right here. And it reminds me of in that movie, The Devil Wears Prada, and she got onto that blue sweater she was wearing and how that specific color wasn't something she happened to choose. It was chosen for her. And I think that everything, I'm holding a pencil. I mean, this pencil has an incredible story of its vulcanized rubber that maybe came from Vietnam. Maybe the lead came from Colorado. There's a reason why they're using this particular yellow color on it. And even the design of having it, how many sides is it? 5 sides? That, somebody found along the way from a dexterity standpoint that this was the better thing. And even the type of wood, I think this is some sort of pine. I don't know where it comes from, but it probably sharpens better. So anything that you have, has an evolution to it. And to me personally, I love when architects or hotel designers tell me why they chose certain aspects of their lobby, what the stone, not everything is just driven by cost. It's because of the story that each one of these materials or the shape, wants to make people feel. The reason the whole idea of putting chocolates on somebody's turned over covers, I'd never do that at my own house. I'd be sleeping in chocolate if I did it. But, all of those things have a rhyme and a reason to it. And each one has a story. Um, I mean, there's so many things that we talk about. And I just heard an interesting lecture the other day because we're in the Christmas season, that Jesus's real name wasn't even Jesus. It was Yashu, and that the letter J wasn't even invented until 1524.
Wow. But that something you just said also resonates with me in the sense that many of the hotels or travel experiences that I've had, when the people working there are able to tell the story of that painting or of where that found object is from, it just also goes to show a level of caring, right? And impact that whoever built this place took it upon themselves to be able to make it their mission to continue to educate the people there so that they can tell the story. Some of my most favorite dinners, I was just talking about this yesterday with a colleague of mine, Shannon, that one of the best restaurants I've ever been to, I will never go back because I don't want to ruin it. But most of what it was, I don't want to ruin the memory of it. But most of what the memory was the sommelier telling me and what I'm tasting and how it pairs with this. And I don't know if it's true or not. I'm not a wine guy, but I'm able to suspend all disbelief and just go on a ride and be completely transfixed with that story. And there is an impact. And then in a way, in some other aspect of my life, I wind up paying that forward.
I think that, the food experience is very interesting because it is universal. And so it's no different than when you go to someone's home or a small village and someone's with all the pride in the world telling you why this meal is X, Y, and Z, why they made it, and their family recipe, and how it's the best, and the care they put into it. That's very seductive at any level, even if you don't particularly like the meal. You just feel like the intention was so good. For me, ambiance plays a big role. Like, you know, there's no better dinner than sitting under the stars for me personally, whether I'm in a ship in Antarctica or, um, Africa comes to mind in a boma, where you're just looking at a carpet of stars. To me, that is that is great. In the summer in Connecticut, I love eating outdoors. I really love eating outdoors. I've eaten outdoors at your place. You have a great spot for, I think, entertaining there, Dan. It's nice. I give you a 5-star rating on there.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thumbs up. Um, One other thing I noticed, and I don't, when I was in the lobby of the Explorers Club, I think it was lobby, ground floor, there was a partnership with Rolex, and I think maybe another one with Microsoft, but there were a couple different partnerships that are happening in your townhouse of the Explorers Club. One of the trends I'm seeing in the hotel world, and I don't know why it hasn't taken on more, but this idea of branded residence. So imagine if there was a Rolex hotel or an Apple hotel, or these don't exist right now.
Well, I just stayed in an Armani hotel in Dubai. I mean, that was at Burj Khalifa.
Right. So yes, and I don't know why it hasn't taken off more, because if you think about a hotel as a completely immersive experience, I don't know why more of these aren't happening, but they are starting to happen. There's a trend in this happening now. Were you involved in orchestrating any of those collaborations with those brands and the Explorers Club? And if someone is starting to work on one of these branded type residences or hotels, what are some things to consider if you have experience in setting those up?
Well, you brought up Rolex. That's the our oldest sponsor at the Explorers Club, and it was started by their CEO and named Roland Boutin a long time ago. He's still alive. I know him. He's an outdoorsman, and that was the alignment. But Rolex is an interesting company because they really don't advertise, or I know they don't use consultants to sort of do market studies. They're a lot more organic on it. And from, their partnership is different than most. They really don't want anything in return. They want a polite mention, or they want to know how they're being aligned with other products. But, you know, how they fund things is just different than other companies. Another company that we work with is Penant. It's a luxury cruise line that they take people on really not off the shelf type expeditions, but they've chosen to partner with us because they also include science on it. Like, people can actively do experiments and be part of scientific studies. It's great for multi-generational travel. I deal with them a lot. We discuss what would be interesting to passengers. And I think that what you're finding with a lot of higher end hotels or cruise lines like Penant is that they're trying to give people unique experiences. And I think more and more people, it's not just about going to the Eiffel Tower. It's maybe knowing that the restaurant is just you and 4 other people, and that's it. Or that, you're in Antarctica with somebody who's the foremost glaciologist. All of these kind of unique experiences to me deepen the relationship with that property. And I think, another term that's being used a lot in travel is called cultural immersion. And I think what that is if I'm going to New York City, am I going to have somebody from France take me around? No, I'm going to have a New Yorker. Hey, forget about it, right? And it's the same with when you go someplace else. You don't want to take your slice of America and bring it to Paris, or bring it to La Paz, or to any other place, to Nepal. You want that cultural immersion on a curated kind of level. Curated meaning that they're looking at the best aspects of their culture, allowing you to experience it. And also, I think a lot of Americans want Hemingway without the hangover. They want to go someplace that's cool, but know they're also safe and they're being watched over.
And six-toed cats always help, right, in the background.
That's right. The ones in Florida.
A lot of what you just said also has to do with, as far as on the immersion side, this experiential travel. That's another trend that's definitely happening in the luxury and also just lifestyle. It's more approachable for everyone, whether it's glamping, having a cultural immersion, learning a language, going on a long cycling trip. Has the Explorers Club thought about doing that more, or partnering with any of the larger hotel brands out there as far as digging into what their experiential travel might be? And then on the other side, I know we're talking about terrestrial travel, but even Hilton now is working on, they're actually building out a hotel that would be up in space, that there could be space tourism coming from. But is there has the Explorers Club figured out a way to kind of put themselves between those experiences to kind of make exploration more approachable for everyone? I guess that's what I'm going to try, because a lot of people want to explore things, but they don't know how to take that first step.
Well, I'm going to tell you some of the best first steps is that, and you'll recognize this, where we live close to the Long Island Sound near Westport. At low tide, there's this giant sand flat. You know where it is, Campo Cove. You've been there before. And, the great thing about these big low tide mud flats or sand flats is that there are no rules other than being respectful to nature. And so you see a kid building a sandcastle, you see another kid making a little crab fort, another kid maybe kicking a soccer ball. But to me, that is such a beautiful hour or so where, you could just create. It's a blank canvas. The other thing too is, birding, make a life list. It's one of the few things that you collect that you don't actually take anything. I mean, these got to be things that interest you. For me, I hike through our woods. We're blessed by really great hiking trails, close to where we live. I go every morning with my golden retriever. And, I just love the fact that I see so much from yesterday. I saw a pileated woodpecker to, sometimes I'll see the claw prints of a bear that might have scratched a tree. So, you don't have to go far afield to explore. Part of the perspective of exploration is also seeing something that you've seen often through a new set of eyes. And I'll give you an example. Everybody has seen a full moon come over the horizon that you've said, wow, look at the size of the moon, right? We've all said it. I know everybody said it. And if you ever try to take a photo, the photo never really comes like the experience. And so when the moon comes over the horizon, it's actually a trick of your brain that if you put your thumb out to measure it, or even a tape or a little ruler, and then when it was overhead, it's exactly the same size. So why is that? So it's a trick of your brain. We perceive things on the horizon to be closer than we do overhead. So through our eyes, one of the most intuitive things, it's called the full moon illusion. But one of the most intuitive things is, my God, the moon is huge, right? I see it with my eyes. You can't tell me it's not big, but yet it's a trick of your brain. So the next time, Dan, you go and see that huge moon, just put your thumb out and measure it, and then measure it later. You'll see it's the same size.
So okay. Thank you for sharing that, because it's very timely. I just received a gift from a former podcast guest and also friend, Craig Kalatian. He gives books out every year.
Oh, I'm supposed to give you something now? I'll send you something, Dan.
I expect it. I expect it. No, you don't have to give me anything. But he just sent me Amy Tan's new book. Have you heard this? It's the Backyard Bird Chronicles or something like that.
No, I haven't.
Okay, she wrote Joy Luck Club and all these other. She's like a literary force, right? But it's basically, I just flipped through the first couple of pages, but it's this meditative journey to her backyard and just starting to look at birds. And I guess oftentimes if I think of exploration, it's this big thing where you need bags of ropes and petanques and gear. But like what you just said, we can always just start exploring in our backyard, because it's all right there, or a mud flat, or you can just zoom in on something the size of your thumb, like if it's the moon or a patch of grass, and just learn so much just from being right there.
I agree. Sometimes you have to like I've gotten into foraging a bit, and I actually had a bad foraging experience this past spring. Yeah, the mushrooms. Whew. Oh my God. That was
Oh, wow. Were they fun mushrooms or were they poisonous mushrooms?
well, they weren't fun for me, but I think in retrospect they were. They were a psilocybin, which I think are called magic mushrooms. So if one or two get you high, I had a dozen of them. And when so just to give you some backdrop, I a friend of mine, she's a forager, she's also a chef. I showed her some mushrooms that were growing in my backyard. She said, "Those are really great, but why don't you eat smaller ones? Those are gonna be a little tough." So, I got a good amount of them, a really good amount, and I sautéed them in garlic and put them in an omelet, and I'm just sitting there with my dog by my side and, my screen porch, and I'm going, "Gosh, I'm God, a little bit of a headache." I said, "Let me have a glass of water," and what I didn't know is that water makes mushrooms express themselves. So it shot through my veins and head. I thought I was having a stroke, but I knew the test to test yourself for a stroke. And I could feel like a train that I was going to black out. And I said to Nikki, I said, "Nikki, you got to get me to the emergency room." And, I fought really long and hard not to pass out. You know, of course, yeah, that was not fun. That was just in my the wood chip pile right in my side of my house.
I was many years ago. I was invited to a dinner at the James Beard Foundation, on 13th or 12th, somewhere down there in the village, and the whole menu was foraged from within like 20 blocks of Greenwich Village. It was amazing.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I honestly, I love I mean, I do it all the time with a lot of greens. I mean, stuff is fresh. There's more food in the woods where we live than there is in the grocery store. You just have to know what to eat. And I'm just not doing the mushroom route again.
And okay, understood. Okay, but it's also just a metric, and you might not have the latest, but regarding Nikki's food scraps collection and turning into compost. Again, this is something that anyone can start anywhere, wherever you live, and that's a different kind of exploration. But how many tons have been diverted and now converted into compost?
I don't know. It's in the tons. My wife was originally from South Africa, and she went back to be part of the post-apartheid South Africa, and she started an organization called the Africa Foundation. She was in her early 20s, and the whole idea was to include local communities around safari parks so that the safari venues would hire local people, buy their food, all of that stuff, so that locals would find that having this safari area in their backyard would be a good thing. People would get jobs, they would sell their food there, they'd work there, they'd become executives there. And so um, that particular organization, as of 5 years ago, I think it raised like $65 million. So yes, my wife is very industrious. But she did it for the right reasons. Honestly, I wasn't as socially conscious, until I met my wife. I just maybe it's becoming a father too, but, you just sort of realize that it's not how fast I get up to the mountain, it's sort of the people you meet along the way.
And well, but you've been exploring since when you were 11, was that the biggest or the first big trip that you remember going up Kilimanjaro with your dad?
Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of, like, expedition, yeah, this is 1971, it wasn't even a national park then, and I remember, we went to in New York City, Abercrombie and Fitch, at that time was an outfitter, not an underwear company, and, getting the leather boots and all of that, but, you know, after that, to me, I was just outside all the time, didn't matter whether it rained or snowed. I would go to we lived on a harbor, on the North Shore of Long Island. I'd go clamming by myself. I started a lobster business. I was just always outside and, I used to go, There was a local private trout preserve that I used to go poaching in as a kid. It's just always outside. I'm way tougher than my kids are for sure at that age.
Right. Well, yeah. Yeah. Our kids go to surf camp in France, and it's really hard for them.
Yeah, and they're raised like little veals.
Totally. They are little veals. Oh, I can't wait to play this for them. But since you were 11, you've been exploring, you've been telling stories about it, producing shows, winning Emmys, getting nominated for Emmys. Now you're at the helm of the Explorers Club. How do you, I guess by nature of just exploring, it's a very curious thing, but what keeps you curious and keeps your sails full as far as continuing on this path?
But Dan, there's so much to learn. I mean, just knowledge in and itself is enough to keep you curious, right? Whenever you learn one thing about archaeology, suddenly, wow, you realize how much there is to learn about archaeology. Or, if you go on a dinosaur dig and you find something and you realize there's this whole world. And this is where I may disagree with certain people who feel the internet, or at least Google or ChatGPT, is ruining the world. To me, it's expanded my knowledge base because as a kid, if I wanted to learn about something, it was pretty tough to go to the library, look it up, find a book. There's obviously something magical about that. And, I can sort of reminisce about those kind of days. But if I see a tree I don't know or a bird or any of that stuff, man, I can look it up so fast.
It's instant gratification.
Yeah, well, it's not even the gratification. It's knowledge at my fingertips. I think the difference is that because you and I grew up pre-internet, that we did things a different way. We can sort of approach. I'm definitely glad I grew up before there was online this or that.
Well, that brings up another great point and a question I wanted to ask you, but in this world of TikToks and 8-second video clips, how do you keep creating this long form exploration content, right? And you surround yourself around that. So how do you keep that long form content like relevant and inspiring? I know I couldn't stop watching the American Revolution documentary that Ken Burns did, but my kids, they tried to sit there for a little while with me, maybe for two of the episodes, but then after a while, I can just see it's like short circuited their brains.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a challenge there. And I know that, my particular kids have traveled quite a bit. My wife's in the safari business. I'm sort of in kind of in the travel business. And so they've been a lot of places, but I know as soon as they get to their hotel room, man, how they relax is getting on their iPhone and just, looking at whatever they're doing. It's challenging. I think it's more than just bringing them to really cool places because I think, again, I just watch teenagers, they gravitate right to the phone. They're not looking at people in the face anymore. It's challenging.
Exactly. But okay, so that's them as it pertains to the children, our children in particular. But although your boys definitely always look me in the eye and say hello, they're so awesome. So, and I know that my son, by virtue of being, I hope he reciprocates to you.
Yes, Theo's always very polite to me.
Okay, good. So we're winning. But do you find in the long form content that you've been creating over the years and your contemporaries are creating, do you find the market changing?
It's disappearing. It's disappearing.
So how, like, yeah, walk me through that. Like how do you have to modulate or modify the stories that you're telling or put them in different format? Like what's your experience on that?
I think that if you're a good storyteller in any format, you always have to be rigorous with yourself. But the US market is definitely changing. There are very few outdoor or travel shows that are actually on TV or even popular in streaming anymore. The market's just not demanding those. I know in the UK it's different because the BBC is such a fixture for people. It's channel 1 and 2 on their TV. So they're sort of forced to watch it and they seem to like it. I don't know. For me, it's disappointing because I'm interested in the subject. But then again, if I think about it, a lot of travel shows or nature shows, I don't particularly like, especially if I feel like they're over sensationalized or, the host has become like Superman. He can, it's like MacGyver. Every situation, he just knows what to do. I mean, those people really don't exist.
As you look to the future and think about your tenure at the Explorers Club and all the works that all the projects that you're working on and collaborations, and you look to the future, what's exciting you most about what you see in the future as it pertains to you?
I think it's not so much that it pertains to me, that what gives me a lot of hope and optimism is there is a whole generation of 20-something-year-olds, and I'll even extend it into their 30s, that really are dedicated to making the world a better place. And they're not doing it necessarily for money. They're doing it out of love of science, love of, clean water or fresh air. And so there are quite a few very smart young people working on these issues, and they seem highly motivated. And because of the way communication works, they can intersect each other a lot quicker than in the past. You will have colleagues halfway around the world, or even I know within the Explorers Club community, you might be in, Morocco one week talking at some session, and then, be in California, and you'll run into the same people. And because of um, WhatsApp and texting, you're connecting all the time. So I think people are connecting a lot more just because they have the ability to. So I'm optimistic that there's a lot of young, motivated, smart people, and they're really amazing. They're really amazing.
Yeah. And now, as you think about how far afield that you're going and that other explorers are going, whether if you are doing an exploration not under your thumb, but out in the world, you sprinkle a little Starlink in there, and it's amazing where the connection happens, because now you can be anywhere. Even, and I guess there's the other side of the coin there too, where it's like it's really hard to just get away and shut everything off as well.
Well, I'm not even concerned with that. You mentioned that in a communications place, you could be any place in the world. You can also physically be any place in the world within 24 hours. I had to get to Everest Base Camp in 24 hours. It is possible for me to get there. Now, the problem with that is that you lose an apprenticeship of skills, especially outdoor skills. You see this all the time on Everest. When Shackleton had his expedition that went wrong, the reason why everybody lived is everybody knew how to take care of themselves. And that's no longer the case. You're so dependent on people. And so with this ability to travel fast is also great responsibilities. I had friends who died on that submersible that imploded because they had the money. They could just go there and they didn't even think about it, and they were gone. Or, I've seen that story play out a lot where people just get over their ski tips a little too far.
Yeah. Well, I got to say, I love the fact that we have the Neil Armstrongs and the Christopher Columbuses and the Ferdinand Magellans and these explorers who, they didn't know what was out there. And I'm also glad that they exist, because that's not for me. Like, I don't want to go to space. I don't want to sail out into, now that I know that there's a continent on the other side of the ocean, I'm glad to go. I'd love to do that. But to be the first of anything doing those feats, I'm glad that humanity is wired in a certain
Yeah.
way that those people can do what they need to do. And then I'll be the second follower or whatever that is. But I love the work that you're doing. And it's so weird that for years I had no idea that you were even at the Explorers Club. But I just want to say thank you for being here and sharing your story, and hopefully inspiring some of our listeners to explore closer to home too, and lift where they stand and make an impact where they are, because I think that is like the next frontier of exploration, is how do we make everything better for all of us. So I just want to say thank you for being here.
Dan, I enjoyed it. You and I should get together more often instead of just dropping off kids, or, get away from the our little princes, right?
We will. Maybe we can go out to your wood chip pile this weekend. We can go forage a little bit and then do our own exploration.
I'll drop some mushrooms off at your house. That's my gift.
Right. But you know what I do want to know, and we'll do this after we hang up, is I need to find out when you're walking with the dogs in the morning, because I would love to go walk with someone if you want to have a companion.
Oh yeah. So you know where I can tell you when we hang up.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about who you hang out. But Richard, if people wanted to learn more about you and the work that you've done, the Emmy Award winning work, but also the Explorers Club and even the Jouberts or other people who are kind of giving back and lifting where they stand, what's a good way for them to get in touch or learn more about you and the Explorers Club?
Well, I mean, the Explorers Club, obviously, I'm a small part of it, but explorers.org is the best way to look at the Explorers Club. They have actually a pretty good website, I think. Just I read a lot of articles. You'll see a lot of same names come popping up. Look up the Jouberts. It's Joubert. And we know that J wasn't invented until 1524.
Yeah, exactly. The printing press was sometime around then too. We'll be sure to put all that into the show notes. And I just want to give you a heartfelt thank you for sharing your experience with all of our listeners. Thank you.
You are welcome.
And to all of our listeners, if this has changed your idea of hospitality and exploration and even lifting where you stand and giving back and taking that little step to join that organization or nonprofit in some other kind of path of leadership, to just kind of show up for the party, and just be part of the crew, please pass it along, because I think that all of this inspiration can act as inspiration for others. So thank you, and we'll catch you next time.